Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this RCSLT conference session on working with people who stammer and clutter. It's really great to see so many of you here. My name is Gillian Mudd, and I'm the facilitator for this session. And I'm joined by two fabulous presenters. So we have Sarah Corter and Ronan Miller, and myself will be presenting to you in this session. Before we get started, we need to cover the housekeeping, so a few notes before we get going. This is a session without a live Q&A at the end, but we would really welcome your comments and questions. So you can add comments in the chat box throughout, and everybody will be able to see those. But you can also add questions directly to the presenters today using the questions tab. So if you post in there, then we will be able to get back to you as presenters after the session to provide more information, to answer any queries that you've got. And we'd really welcome those conversations. As you would do in any other setting, we ask that you are kind and respectful when sharing your comments in any of those forums. It's helpful to know that all of the sessions are being recorded. So recordings will be available in the video section of the platform after the live event has taken place, and they'll remain on the platform for 6 months after the conference. Please don't forget to leave feedback for speakers and event organisers in the feedback tab after each live session. It's invaluable for future event planning, but you'll also earn points. And so linked to that points point and the challenge hub that you might have seen already, at the end of this session, a secret code will appear. So jot that down, make a note of it, and head to the challenge hub and hit enter the code on the landing page to move yourself up the leaderboard. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter is Sarah Corter, and Sarah is presenting to us about learning from people with lived experience of cluttering, what people who clutter want from therapy. So thank you so much for being here with us, Sarah, and over to you.
Thank you, Gillian. Hopefully you can see my slides. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about a recent research study that we conducted at the Michael Palin Centre, looking into what clients who clutter want from therapy, and ultimately whether we're getting cluttering therapy right, from the perspectives of people who clutter themselves. So I'm going to briefly explore the themes around what the cluttering research is telling us. I'll talk about the aims of this study and go through the qualitative results and think about what this all might mean for our therapy for people who clutter. So previous research into cluttering has focused on gaining a consensus around how to define cluttering and what outward features would warrant a diagnosis of cluttering. And whilst it was initially thought that people who clutter lack an awareness of their symptoms, actually from listening to the perspectives of people who clutter, we've learnt that actually this often isn't the case. And in fact, many people are aware of breakdowns in communication and of being misunderstood. And some people might be quite aware of specific moments of cluttered speech. We've also learnt from research of the negative impact of cluttering for some people, for example, experiencing negative emotions and reactions, avoidance of speaking situations, and social implications in terms of relationships with others and underemployment. Adam's research with parents of children who clutter talked about the difficulties of receiving a diagnosis for their child, and also the demands of self-monitoring for children being extremely difficult. The current evidence base for cluttering intervention focuses mostly on the effects of speech techniques and strategies, including things like rate reduction, pausing, over-articulation, and practicing these techniques in speech hierarchies in the client's real world. The onus of these direct strategies is typically on the person who clutters themselves to monitor and repair communication breakdowns. Some cluttering research explores the cognitive and affective impact of cluttering. However, there's much less research on actually supporting people with those components. And more recent publications have sought to understand cluttering from the perspectives of people who clutter themselves, as well as their families. And we can't apply the same research and therapy ideas from stammering. So it's really important for us to understand this unique speech difference from those who have lived experience themselves. A study by Ali Burkez and colleagues in 2015 explored what children who stammer and their parents want from therapy. However, this perspective hasn't been broadly researched for cluttering. So there is emerging but limited research investigating what people who clutter want from therapy, guided by those who clutter themselves. So in this study, we really wanted to explore the perspectives of people who clutter across the age range, so children and adults, as well as parents of children who clutter, within a clinical population, to get a variety of insights about what people's best hopes are from therapy. And the process of eliciting best hopes or expectations from therapy, we've used solution-focused brief therapy, which is routinely used at the Michael Palin Centre with children who stammer and clutter and their parents. The aim clinically is to identify individual targets, to set goals, and to identify small signs of change. And as part of this approach, a rating scale of 0 to 10 can be used. 10 is defined as the person's best hopes, and 0 is the opposite. So the client's asked to describe what 10 looks like and what will be different when they reach 10 or near 10. The therapist facilitates this using a solution-focused brief therapy questioning style. So questions like, what are your best hopes from therapy for yourself and for your child, if it's a parent, and what difference will that make? And the result is a list of individualized best hopes. So in this study, we looked at 17 brief therapy scales. There were 11 people who clutter, 8 were children, aged 8 to almost 18, and 3 were adults. 6 parent scales were also included. Parents typically would complete the scale together if it's a 2-parent family. There were fewer parents than children because some of the children were older clients, so between 16 and 18, and didn't have a parent involved in therapy. Of the children and adults who clutter, there was 1 child and 1 adult with cluttering only, and the rest stammered as well. For all participants in this study, cluttering was the main clinical priority, but only 1 adult had had previous cluttering therapy. So brief scales were analysed using thematic analysis, and thematic networks were generated to summarise basic, organising and global themes arising from the data. In order to reduce investigator bias, investigator triangulation was used, where 2 researchers independently coded the brief scales from each participant group. They agreed the common themes and interpretations together, and then finally decided on the basic and organising themes. And a 3rd researcher checked the validation of the coding, and amendments were made where needed. So a consensus was reached across 3 researchers. And here's an example of a child's best hopes conversation, including hopes around having more fluent flow of speech, feeling more confident, talking more, reading aloud in class more, feeling more engaged in lessons, feeling recognised by others, other people engaging with them more, and parents feeling more relaxed. So here are the results, starting with the children's best hopes. And this is just an overview. I'm going to go through each one. The global themes are in yellow, the organising themes in green, and basic themes in blue. So the first global theme for the children was a change within self, with the organising themes of cognitive and affective change and speech change. Cognitive and affective change included feeling more accepting of their speech, so things like, it'll be fine for cluttering to be there sometimes, but not as much, and when it does happen, it wouldn't matter. Increased confidence and experiencing more positive emotions around their speech, so things like feeling happier, more positive, and having more courage. And speech change referred to clarity, so speech being clearer, control, feeling more in control and being able to maintain that control when speaking passionately about something, as well as speaking with more flow and with more ease. The second global theme was environmental and social change. The first organising theme was reciprocal interaction, which included being understood more easily by others and changes in the way that the listener responds to them. So communication partners listening more, giving advice less, praising more, and agreeing or answering more, showing that they've understood what the child was saying. The second was connecting with others, which included the basic theme of connection. So having better connections with people, having more engaging conversations, other people engaging with them more and talking more together. And social participation, which included talking more and being more independent. So doing things for themselves more and stretching their comfort zones, putting their hand up in class more, ordering food for themselves, reading out loud in class. The second thematic analysis was conducted on the parents' brief scales to look at best hopes for both themselves and their child. And again, I'll go through each one. So the social context was the first global theme, and the organising themes were social participation, which was similar actually to the children's best hopes around talking more and expanding their comfort zones, as well as developing friendships. Environmental change included receiving additional support in school, as well as improvements in sleep. And two parents talked about changes in other partners, communication partners, improving. So other people feeling more relaxed when they were interacting with their child. And effective interaction was another theme that was similar to the children's best hopes around their child being understood more, being clearer in their speech, and finding talking easier, resulting in better connection. And actually, statements that were coded under connection were made by every single parent in this study. The second global theme for the parents was their child having a bright future. Three parents talked about their best hopes for their child in the future and being able to reach their potential, including their child being his best self and speech not being a block in the way of the future. One parent described their best hope of others seeing their child's sense of humour, their compassion, loyalty, focus, intelligence, and caring and sensitive nature. So seeing the child as much more than just their communication or their speech. Parents also talked about hopes of feeling more knowledgeable about cluttering and understanding ways they can support their child, as well as changes in their own emotional reactions to it. So feeling more patient, relaxed, happier, confident, less worried and frustrated. And the adults in this study, the first global theme was being the best communicator I can be. And this included getting my message across effectively, with basic themes around clarity, so communicating more easily, more concisely, and more clearly. Writing was mentioned by one adult who said things will make sense when I put them across in writing and my writing will be quicker. And the second organising theme was having techniques or usable strategies that they're aware of, but importantly, having the confidence and feeling comfortable enough to actually use them. So one adult said they need to be usable in the real world, which was useful. And then the second global theme for adults was the bigger picture, and this included acceptance, things like it'll be there, just not the biggest thing in my life, feeling more positive, confident, and being kinder to themselves, and life beyond cluttering, involving interviews, feeling more competent delivering their job, dealing with things after university. So this table summarises the key hopes across the three groups to see the common themes and differences. At an organising theme level, the similarities across the groups were cognitive and affective change, communicating more effectively, social participation, and speech change or use of techniques. The main differences were that children talked about having better connection, more reciprocity in their interactions, and enjoying communication more. Parents hoped for their child to be better understood, to reach their potential, and to be their best future self. And adults talked about life beyond cluttering, so interviews, university, jobs. So from our findings and from recent cluttering research, themes that are important to include in cluttering therapy are represented in this image. And whilst it incorporates techniques to increase intelligibility and effectiveness of communication, There's a more balanced and broad therapeutic focus, including acceptance and identity work, as well as thoughts and feelings, and involving communication partners as part of therapy. So what does this mean for our clinical practice? Well, firstly, although there were common themes that came from the data, this process has really reinforced how everyone's best hopes from therapy will be different and unique to that person. So we really need to individualize our therapy. Common themes from this study, which could be considered as part of cluttering therapy, might be the importance of family work and involving the client's communication partners in therapy to enhance interactive listening and more effective communication. Remembering that the speaker is working really hard to communicate and the listener has an important role to support them in communicating their message. Liaison with school will be important around building knowledge and confidence in teachers and working towards the best communicator you can be. Therapy tasks might include learning more about communication skills, identifying communication strengths and targets, noticing the clues that a listener might not be following, and having strategies to be able to repair communication breakdowns in order to be more successful communicators and to build better connections, which was something that was really key that came up in this study. Working at a cognitive and emotional level, this feels really important to address and was a key theme that came up across all three groups. We know that people who clutter can experience negative thoughts and emotions about their speech, and we might need to support children and young people to identify their thoughts and feelings in specific situations, and potentially to build more helpful messages and compassionate self-talk to build that communicative confidence. And working towards acceptance and embracing one's own identity, particularly mentioned by the adults in this study. With cluttering might also come creativity, ideas, interesting perspectives, and this is just a part of someone's identity that they might not wish to change. So the strengths of this study, we used a clinical sample of adults and children as well as parents. It's essential that our research listens to the voices of people who clutter themselves. And qualitative research allows a really good exploration and understanding of that human experience. So the information that we get is really rich and informative. One of the really interesting but a limitation of this study is the co-diagnostic nature of cluttering. So the majority of participants in this study also stammer as well as clutter. So we're not able to draw broad conclusions about clients' best hopes regarding cluttering on its own, and some of those hopes might be linked to stammering as well. And qualitative research by nature can be quite subjective, and we can't capture the views of everyone. However, the results of this study have provided some really interesting food for thought around the need for holistic therapy for this client group and some specific themes that might hold importance. So where from here, we need more data, essentially, to draw more robust conclusions, so bigger sample sizes in each of those groups. But it's a good starting place to help us to understand the needs and wishes of this client group. And importantly, we need to continue to develop therapist knowledge and confidence in assessing and supporting clients who clutter so that we can be more effective in supporting people who clutter. So whistle stop talk, but thank you so much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. That sounds like a fantastic piece of work. Really great to hear those voices coming through so strongly and in a way that can shape our own practice and how we serve that community. So thank you so much for sharing that work with us. I'm going to move on to our second presenter now. So we are going to move over to Dr. Ronan Miller. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Ronan. Ronan is here talking to us about his project, so empowering children who stammer and their families, co-production of the novel mobile application Super Penguin. So thank you again, Ronan, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me get my Screen sharing going.
I'm very impressed with your branded background, Ronan.
Thank you. I hope it's not distracting. Okay, my slides have appeared. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll get going. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name's Ronan Miller, and I'm going to talk about the co-production of Super Penguin, which is a mobile app designed to support families of children who stammer. This is a project that brings together families, people who stammer, speech and language therapists, stammering charities, academics, and a digital health team. And I'd like to acknowledge the work of my colleagues here, Victoria Kale, Patricia Holsch, and Ben Holton Grant. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to try and cover three main areas. Firstly, why there's a need for support for families of children who stammer. Secondly, how we went about co-producing Super Penguin. And third, how the app aimed to support families while they wait for and alongside NHS speech and language therapy. So first of all, why is this important? Well, stammering is relatively common. Around 5 to 8% of children will stammer at some point, and roughly 1% will continue to stammer into adulthood. I am part of that group. But the impact for families goes far beyond speech itself. For parents and carers, there's often a lot of anxiety, questions around if they are doing the right thing, are they making things worse? Parents are generally concerned about offering the best support they can. And sometimes if they're unsure about that, then it can create more anxiety and emotional impact. At the same time, access to specialist support can be difficult. In some parts of the country, families wait for months just for an initial appointment with a specialist speech and language therapist, and in other areas, it's much longer than that. So we end up with a challenging situation where you have a concerned family, a child who may be struggling, and in some cases, very little specialist input during that time. And that's really the gap that Super Penguin is trying to fill. What happens to families while they are waiting? So to understand the app, we also need to think about how we approach stammering. Up until quite recently, many approaches have focused on fluency or reducing the number of stammers. For some people, these approaches can be helpful, but increasingly we're starting to recognize stammering as a speech difference rather than something that automatically needs to be addressed and fixed and with an aim on fluency. So from a stammering affirming perspective, the problem isn't the stammer itself necessarily, but the reactions to it. That could be the interruptions that occur, the pressure to speak quickly or in certain ways, and for children, bullying, stigma, etc. So the aim shifts a bit. So instead of thinking about how we can make a child sound fluent, we start to ask, how can we help this child communicate happily and freely? How can we support a positive stammering identity, and how can we change the environments that they are in? And parents and carers are central to this. They set the tone at home, they advocate at school, and they often carry a lot of the emotional load as well. So our approach here was to, if we think about stammering affirming approaches, then we need to make sure we're also supporting carers in that as well as the children. So with that context, let me introduce you to Super Penguin. And the aim here was to co-produce a mobile app with the key stakeholders, but particularly caregivers, that could support them from referral through to therapy and after discharge, and provide that support in a way that's firmly grounded in a stammering affirming approach. So the app is caregiver focused. It's not for the children, it's for the carers. To support families with children roughly in the age range of 2 to 12. And it grew out of an earlier pilot app, which was just called Penguin, which offered a fixed 10-day introduction to stammering. This original app was recommended by UK charities and was used in some 50 NHS trusts. So based on that use and the feedback, we heard that Penguin was helpful, but a bit too short and a bit too fixed. People wanted ongoing support, broader topics, and something that could adapt to their situation. So with funding from the National Institute of Health and Care Research, we set out to expand and rebuild Penguin into Super Penguin, with using co-production from the beginning and preparing it for feasibility testing in a randomized trial. A key part of this work is how we develop the app. So we grounded the process in the UK standards for public involvement in research. This was very deliberately framed as with and by, not to or for families. And we embedded patient and public involvement throughout. This means that contributors were involved in shaping the aims, the content, the features, and even the way we talk about stammering in the app. In total, 101 people were actively involved, including parents and carers, young adults who stammer, speech and language therapists, and representatives from stammering charities. We set up 2 formal advisory groups, a parent advisory group and a young person's advisory group. And we also had a parent and a charity representative as co-applicants on the project. So their voice was present in all of the strategic decisions. We then also had a wider group of contributors who could join when they could, which we felt was important for inclusion and flexibility. So what did co-production actually look like on a day-to-day basis? Well, most of our work together happened online. We held individual and group video calls with parents, with young people who stammer, and with SLTs. And we used email and messaging to share prototypes and gather feedback. In the early stages, we focused on people's experiences, their journeys, their encounters with services, and crucially, the gaps that they could identify where they would have appreciated more support. As the project progressed, we moved into more concrete tasks. So people tested early versions of the app, early versions of the content, gave detailed feedback on wording and tone, commented on things like the pace of the experience using the app, the length of the activities, and the types of examples that we were using there as well. These groups met regularly, and the feedback often led to quite significant changes. For example, decisions about whether or not to include child-facing content and what features were most important. We reimbursed contributors for their time, and we tried to make involvement as flexible as possible, recognizing that many people were juggling work, studies, childcare, and their own emotional load as well. The key point here is that co-production wasn't a one-off workshop. It was a continuous iterative process throughout the development. And across all of these conversations, some very consistent themes emerged. First, caregivers needed emotional support for themselves. Many described feeling guilty, worried, or afraid of making it worse. They wanted reassurance and empathy. Second, they needed practical guidance in response to questions like, how do I talk to my child about their stammering? How do I talk to teachers? How do I explain stammering to grandparents or other family members who might say unhelpful things? And third, people who stammer stress the importance of positive representation. They wanted carers of children who stammer to see and hear confident stammering voices, not just fluent voices talking about stammering. Speech and language therapists, meanwhile, wanted something that was evidence-based and aligned with stammering affirming practice, but also practical, something that could fit into existing care pathways rather than creating new barriers. And finally, everyone talked about flexibility. Families are different, children are different, and one rigid linear course was unlikely to meet the needs of a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old in the same way. So personalization and choice became really important design priorities. What did all of this input actually change in the app? The first thing it changed was the content. With contributors, we developed a set of bite-sized topics that mapped directly onto the needs they had described. So, for example, we developed modules on understanding stammering in a realistic and hopeful way, creating a stammer-safe environment at home, talking to teachers at schools, and preparing for those moments when younger children may become more aware of their stammer and potentially start to worry about it. For carers of older children, there's content on emotions, on dealing with teasing, bullying, and on supporting their child's own voice and agency. The format is intentionally light, short videos, simple explanations, reflective questions, and practical try this at home activities. The idea here was that parents could find something meaningful in small periods of time that they have in the day without it feeling like another piece of homework or a large task. Throughout everything that we did, the language was shaped by the families and people who stammer so that it feels affirming and realistic rather than clinical or pathologizing. It's also written to be accessible, and we aimed for a reading age of around 10 and made sure that the content was approved by both clinicians and carers. Co-production also influenced the features of Super Penguin. So contributors told us they wanted guidance, but they also wanted freedom and control. So when people sign up to the app asks them a few questions about their situation, and then we use AI to suggest a personalized path through the topics, starting with what's most relevant to them. Importantly, this personalization doesn't hide anything, and all content remains accessible in a central library, so people can explore whatever they would like, whenever they would like. Parents also talked about wider family. Very often there was one caregiver who became kind of the project manager for the situation, while other families may not have had the same understanding or may accidentally undermine what was happening. So to respond to this, we built a family network feature that allows family members to invite others so they can also access the tailored content in there as well. And then finally, we included some light touch measures to help carers track change. So things like brief well-being scales and reflections on their best hopes. And all of these features came directly from what people told us were missing in their current experiences. One area where contributors were especially clear was around representation. They wanted the app not just to talk about stammering in a positive way, but to actually sound like the community it was serving. We started this a bit with Penguin, which included my voice as a representation of the community. But with Super Penguin, we wanted to go further, and we've included a range of other voices. This has included collaboration with our charity partners, Action for Stammering Children and Stammer, as well as members of our advisory groups who have lent their voices to the project. We tried to be careful about the messages we were sending, avoiding anything that implied that fluency is a success story and stammering is a failure. We also experimented with technology to support this. One example is we created an AI voice clone of my voice, which intentionally preserved the stammer. This was done as an experiment, but also trying to ensure representations of stammering exist, even when technology is used to produce voice content, which is happening more and more. As far as we know, this is the first AI voice that stammers, and we consulted on this closely with our advisory groups to ensure this decision aligned with their ideas of representation that they wanted to be present in the app. So how do we hope the work that we've done can actually help? Well, in a few ways, but particularly in regard to inequities in access to care. So at the moment, whether you get timely specialist support for stammering often depends on where you live and the resources that your local service has. We built Super Penguin in a way that it can be offered from the point of referral. So instead of families sitting on a waiting list without much input, they can immediately start to receive the guidance and support that's in the app. It's designed to complement therapy, not replace it. So SLTs can, if they choose, signpost to specific areas of the app, encourage families to reflect on the activities between sessions, or use the app's content as a shared reference point. And after people leave in-person therapy, the app can remain as a resource for them, reinforcing key ideas and offering support when new situations arise. For families, the message is clear. You're not alone while you wait, and there's something that you can do in that time. We evaluated our own PPIE process against the UK standards. We can report that contributors felt generally heard and valued, and many could see how their input had shaped content and features. For example, the decisions around child-facing content, which we ultimately decided needed more time to be safe. Using tools like the Public Involvement in Research Impact Toolkit helped us document how PPIE influenced design decisions. We've also learned that there's more to do. We want to increase diversity amongst contributors, improve communication about how input is acted on, and give clearer guidance to ad hoc contributors on what kind of feedback is most helpful. We're also exploring ways to combine co-production activities with continuing professional development opportunities for NHS SLTs to make involvement more sustainable. We're now moving into feasibility testing as part of our NIHR Invention for Innovation grant project. The project will involve the use of the Super Penguin app in 3 NHS sites. At the same time, we're also deploying Super Penguin in real-world pilots with several other NHS trusts, supporting a range of speech and language therapy pathways in addition to stammering. If you're interested in talking further about this or anything else I've mentioned, please get in touch via the conference platform or by email. I'd be thrilled to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ronan.
Thank you.
What a lot of work that has gone on, and great to hear that strong focus on co-production all the way through. And there are some questions waiting for you in the conference platform afterwards. So thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our final presentation for this session. And so just bear with me whilst I balance the tech and get this set up. I'm just going to check that that's showing up as expected. Apologies, folks, just give me 1 minute. So 1 1 second, folks. Brilliant. Thank you very much for bearing with me as I change from my facilitator hat to my presenter hat. I am so pleased to be talking to you this afternoon about Stammer's research arena and the way that we have approached centering lived experience in the design and direction of stammering research. I'm presenting today in my role as a volunteer for Stammer. So I've been a member of Stammer, previously the British Stammering Association, for the last 20 years. And I was a trustee between 2018 and 2024, and then more recently have been a volunteer facilitating the research arena and being part of the service panel. And I'm presenting this work on behalf of my research arena co-facilitator, the fabulous Kirsten Howells, who is the Deputy Chief Exec of Stammer and the programme lead for adults within that space. So a little bit first about Stammer. If you, I imagine lots of people in the room and watching this back will know about the organisation already. But if you don't, we are the leading national charity supporting people who stammer, and our vision is to create a world that makes space for stammering. So where a stammer is embraced as just a difference, where no one judges people on their stammering or the way that they deal with it. And so it's very much an organisation that is focused on the actions of all people. So absolutely, we are there for people who stammer, and they are central in all of our work. We're an organisation that is led by people who stammer. It's actually written into our articles of association that we need to be led by people who stammer. So the majority of our board has to be made up of people who stammer. But what we recognise, and building on some of the comments already made by Ronan, is that it's not necessarily the people who stammer who need to change for people's experiences to get better. Actually, lots of the issues that people who stammer experience are caused by people who don't stammer, people who don't know how to react, who react unhelpfully, who create barriers in the environment. And so we recognise the value of community and collaboration, and we recognise at the same time that everybody's an individual. So absolutely, we want you to be proud of stammering if that's something that you align yourselves with. We want you to be able to stammer openly without any barriers to your education or to your employment or to your relationships. But if you choose to do something differently, to engage in therapy programs that focus on the way that you talk, we also want you to feel that stammer is a safe space for you as well. So we really try and meet people where they're at and provide them with the support that they as an individual need, as well as focusing on creating change in public and creating change in society so that it is a more positive place. And what I think is particularly exciting about Stammer as a speech and language therapist is it's an organisation that has long valued the input of speech and language therapists and continues to do that. So Kirsten is a speech and language therapist, and so is in that role as Deputy Chief Executive as a speech and language therapist, which I think is really exciting, as well as a person who stammers. And the organisation also has Catherine Woolley as their programme lead for children's services, again a speech and language therapist. So it really values that expertise, as well as recognising that speech and language therapy isn't the service that is the best fit for everybody. So really trying to balance that diversity of opinion. At Stammer, we provide lots of information and support. There's a really wide range of support services and information on the website. So if you haven't had a look around, please do go and have a look. Parent workshops, information for speech and language therapists, information for employers, information for people wanting to set up networks. So there's lots of a wealth of information and resources there. And we're constantly reviewing that. The organisation is constantly reviewing that and recognises that although research isn't a key strand in the sense that we don't carry out clinical research ourselves, it does underpin all of our work. We want the work that we do at Stammer to be evidence-informed and evidence-based. We want to make sure that we are providing people with relevant and up-to-date information, that we are helping them navigate the myriad resources and information that they can find online about stammering and giving them a safe path through that. So research is important. And we've had to think about how do we support research as an organisation, because what we have had for a long time is researchers contacting us and asking us to share their research studies, asking us to help them recruit. And whilst that is fine in principle, we also wanted to put in some checks and balances to make sure that that research wasn't at risk of being harmful to the community, that we were encouraging co-production, because what we have found for quite a long time, despite the focus from organisations like NIHR, like NHSE, on co-production and public and patient involvement, is that lots of requests to share research were coming through to us that had no involvement from people who stammer. So we were getting lots of research requests, and we specifically asked about it from people basically saying that they'd had a really good idea for a study and could we promote it, but they hadn't spoken to anybody who stammered. And sometimes we could see that come through in the way that the study was designed or the language that they'd use. So they might use language that we might consider to be harmful or risk upsetting people who stammered because they hadn't had those conversations. At the same time, we were also having conversations with researchers who were telling us it was very difficult to recruit participants and they didn't know how to go about that. They didn't know how to increase the number of people taking part in their studies. And so what we realised at that point is that there wasn't a space where researchers and people who stammer could come together as equals and have a conversation. So people were often either participants in a study and had very time limited involvement, or there was no involvement at all. And so we, as a trustee board and as a subcommittee within the research group, started to think about how we might address that. And Ronan has beautifully made this case for me already, but again, just to reinforce that this public and patient involvement in research is so important. And so what we're talking about there is research being done with people rather than to them. And so thinking about that all the way through a project in the way that Ronan's beautifully described. So thinking about how it's designed, how it's carried out, how it's disseminated. And what we know is that when research is done in that way, it has better outcomes and people are more likely to take part in it as it progresses. So we launched what we call the Research Arena in 2021, and it's run bi-monthly since then. So we launched it at a time when lots of people were stuck in their houses, but it's been exciting to see that it has continued beyond that time as a collaborative space for people who stammer and other key partners. So what happens at each event is it happens on a Saturday morning. It takes about an hour and a half. We have 2 presenters at each event, 2 researchers at various stages of their projects, ideally as early on as possible. And they come and talk to us for about 10 minutes about their project. And then we have a question and answer session, a discussion session that is facilitated by myself and Kirsten. And what we're trying to do there is really lean into our values of collaboration and community and provide this space for discussion that is respectful and collegial and adds to the researchers' understanding of their study, gives them an opportunity to talk things through and discuss things, but also provides our attendees with an opportunity to learn more about research design and research terms and how it works and talk through their own views and feelings. And we have some really fantastic conversations in that space where people share their own reflections on what that research means to them, how it could be done differently, what their hopes are for the future. As a charity that is focused on supporting people who stammer, it probably comes as no surprise to us that accessibility was something that was very important to us from the start. We very much felt that we should be a model for what this looks like, how you manage online spaces to make them safe and collaborative for people coming from different experiences and backgrounds and needs. So in terms of how we do that, we share written summaries of the project in advance to reduce cognitive load for the attendees and to enable them to prepare and familiarise themselves with vocabulary or terms if they'd like to do so. At the same time, we say to researchers that there isn't an expected prior knowledge required of our attendees. Some people will be coming having no idea about research terms and how projects work, and some people might be researchers themselves. And so the ask of presenters is to recognise that and differentiate in the room and to provide an accessible summary of their work and explanations of how they are operating. Our structure is the same every time, so we always have 2 presenters, we always have 10-minute presentations approximately, and then space for Q&A after each. And our timings are indicative, not rigid. So again, as a charity who support people who stammer, it absolutely was not appropriate for us to say the presentations need to be 10 minutes exactly, or the Q&A will be 10 minutes exactly. We manage that time to make sure that people are as safe and as comfortable in that space as possible. Some presentations run longer than others, and as facilitators, what we do is we manage the length of the Q&A, for example, to make sure that everybody still finishes on time and has opportunity to say what they want to say. We have closed captioning that's available through the Zoom system. And we also have 2 facilitators for each session. So myself and Kirsten have facilitated each of those events, which means that we can deal with any technical issues. Kirsten is a tech guru, so anything that happens there, she is very good at fixing. But it also means we can respond if somebody is having any issues or needs any additional support. We're much more able to deal with that with 2 of us in the room. And then we invite feedback. We carry out a poll at the end of each session to get some very quick quantitative feedback. We also invite qualitative feedback via email afterwards. And what's been really lovely is that feedback that we have received has been very positive. So here is some feedback at the top from one of our presenters saying that the research arena was a really positive experience and they definitely recommend it. And that arena members gave thoughtful and helpful feedback. And somebody else for a different session has commented, "I love the way these differing perspectives come across." And it's surprisingly hard to create environments where there's not a sort of mono perspective, a loudest voice. So this lovely kind of value of the diversity of views in the room and that being a respectful conversation. We also invited some feedback, kind of more detailed feedback from our attendees, and here are some quotes. So a lovely quote here at the top about, "I've discovered that my own experience, expertise even as a person who stammers, means I can contribute to the discussions." The feedback from another participant saying that they want to ensure researchers are made aware of aspects of their research that they may not have thought of, so the kind of value of those conversations for the researchers and the potential for the research to be richer and more impactful clinically. And again, another attendee, Christine, sharing her views about it gives her an opportunity to particularly highlight women and women who stammer. And the importance of researchers talking directly to the stammering community and giving them an opportunity to input into the research. So our reflections is that it seems to be a positive experience, attendance is stable, and feedback is positive from both participants and researchers. So it seems to still be providing value, which is fantastic. And this theme about psychological safety is really important to us, and we think it does positively contribute to the outcomes and the experience for people. So thinking about if you're going to do something like this, that's definitely something that we would recommend you very consciously considering. And so we recognise that this isn't something that everybody is going to set up, but we do think that there is transferable learning for other spaces and other conversations. And so these are some reflection points that we wanted to share with you, questions that we invite you to consider. So we'd ask you to think about, how is accessibility built in or not in online meetings that you attend? Are timings managed strictly? Is there flex in meetings and sessions that you go to be inclusive of different communication styles and different ways of talking? How do you promote research through your work? So if you are a practicing speech and language therapist, do you ever talk to patients and people that you see about research and what that looks like and how they might get involved? And how might you invite them to be more involved? How might you make them aware that that's an opportunity available to them? And how might we work with other people who might be our partners in this sort of work, thinking about SLTs working in different sectors, other organisations. And how do we, as Ronan has so beautifully described, how do we make that more the norm? So I'm so privileged to be in this online conference space with Sarah, who is going directly to people who clutter and asking them, what does this feel like for you? What is it that you want? And Ronan, who is building in this amazing co-productive approach all the way through. But that's not the norm everywhere and for all clinical areas. So how do we do that more routinely? How do we share that power and move closer towards that in all aspects of our work? I'm conscious that we're moving towards the end of our slot, so just some thoughts here on what this looks like. Top tips: please involve people early, I think is my take home point. Involve people in the design of research projects and the design of services as early as possible. And if you're developing a project, similarly, do contact organisations such as Stammer to look at what their process is for approving requests, and build in some time for that review process. Sometimes people come to us and say it needs to be done today, and that doesn't give us space for those valuable conversations. So think about, how do you involve that early on? How can you provide that support for people so that they can engage? And so finally from me for this presentation, a note that our next research arena is actually this Saturday. So that's very exciting. We have 2 presentations this weekend, but the events are every other month. So if you would like to join us, please check out the Stammer website and have a look at the next one, and you can register online. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. It's been really lovely to talk to you about this work. And thank you so much for attending our conference session on working with people who stammer and clutter. It's been a joy to talk to you all and to listen to presentations from Sarah and Ronan. If you've got any questions, like we said, please add them to the Q&A, or contact me or Sarah or Ronan through the chat function on the platform, or share business cards, any of those exciting functions that the conference platform has set up for us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference, and take care. Thank you, everybody.